The gavel slammed like a thunderclap, silencing the restless courtroom. A humid hush settled over the packed gallery as Alicia Monroe rose from her seat. Her pulse pounded against the polished wood of the defense table. Across the room, Judge Harold Whitman peered down from his elevated bench, his face set like stone, eyes cold and unblinking. This was supposed to be a trial, but to Alicia, it felt like a performance in a theater where the ending had already been decided. Friends, neighbors, and community leaders filled the back rows, their hopeful faces blurred by her fear. Was this the day her freedom and everything she'd fought for would vanish beneath a single word: guilty? Weeks earlier, Alicia's life looked different. A 35-year-old Chicago native, she had built her reputation as a tireless advocate for her South Side neighborhood. Her youth center provided tutoring, job training, and free meals for children whose schools and parents struggled to stay afloat. For Alicia, community service wasn't charity. It was survival. She had watched too many families lose homes to skyrocketing rents and predatory developers. When a powerful real estate consortium announced plans to raise a beloved block of affordable apartments, Alicia organized peaceful protests. Her voice carried through crowded meetings and city council hearings. Our families belong here. We are not disposable. But one spring afternoon, during a march of parents and children chanting for housing rights, chaos erupted. A small group of strangers pushed through the crowd, shouting slurs and shoving police barricades. Bottles flew. Someone set off a smoke bomb. Within minutes, headlines screamed, "Housing protest turns violent." Though Alicia tried to calm her neighbors, officers grabbed her, accused her of inciting a riot, and hauled her to jail. She spent the night in a concrete cell replaying the moment, how quickly a peaceful plea for justice had been twisted into a crime. When Alicia learned her case was assigned to Judge Harold Whitman, an uneasy chill settled in her stomach. Civil rights lawyers knew his reputation. Decades on the bench with a pattern of rulings that disproportionately punished black defendants. Complaints about racial bias were whispered but rarely proved. His clipped, formal demeanor masked something harder to name, but everyone who faced him felt it. From the very first hearing, Whitman's bias seeped through the cracks of formality. He interrupted Alicia's attorney, a sharp and composed black woman named Denise Carter, nearly every time she spoke. When Denise objected to the prosecution's flimsy evidence, grainy videos, and vague witness statements, Whitman waved a dismissive hand. "Overruled," he said, his voice echoing. The prosecutor, a young white assistant district attorney eager for headlines, was granted wide latitude to speculate and insinuate. Alicia watched jurors shift uneasily as the judge let the state's witnesses ramble while cutting off her own. Outside, the story began to draw attention. Local activists rallied on the courthouse steps with signs reading, "Fair trial now and stop the setup." Reporters sniffed around, intrigued by the possibility that a respected community leader was being railroaded. Yet inside, the atmosphere remained heavy, each session a gauntlet of subtle humiliation. When Alicia's character witnesses teachers, clergy, even a city alderwoman took the stand to describe her history of peaceful activism, the judge called their testimony not directly relevant. The implication was clear. Her good works meant nothing here. Days dragged into weeks. Denise uncovered a critical lead. A city camera across from the protest site had recorded everything. But when she requested the footage, the prosecutor claimed it couldn't be located. It smelled like a cover-up. Denise filed motions, argued late into the night, and finally obtained a copy through a sympathetic clerk. The video revealed the truth. Several of the initial agitators were not local residents at all, but hired provocateurs linked to a private security firm contracted by the very developer Alicia opposed. The next morning, Denise moved to admit the footage as evidence. The prosecution objected, arguing chain of custody issues. Judge Whitman leaned forward, jaw tight, and said, This court sees no need to introduce unverified material. Denise's heart raced. She stood firm. Your Honor, this video directly rebuts the core allegation against my client. To suppress it would be a violation of her constitutional rights. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Whitman's eyes flashed with something like anger or fear. For a moment, it seemed he might simply strike the evidence and move on. But outside the courthouse, supporters live-streamed updates to thousands watching online. Journalists tweeted each development. Pressure mounted. Finally, after an uncomfortably long pause, Whitman grudgingly relented. Proceed, he said, voice clipped. The courtroom lights dimmed as the defense played the footage. On the screen, the truth was undeniable. A group of masked individuals, later identified as private contractors, hurling bottles and shoving barricades, while Alicia stood yards away with a megaphone pleading for calm. Gasps echoed across the gallery. Jurors leaned forward. The prosecutor's face drained of color. Denise ended the playback in silence, letting the images speak. Whitman called a recess. He disappeared into his chambers for nearly an hour. Tension gripped the room. Even the air felt charged. When proceedings resumed, the defense rested its case. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. When they returned, the foreperson's voice was steady but ringing. Not guilty on all counts. Alicia closed her eyes as a wave of relief washed over her. Supporters in the gallery clapped, some crying, until Whitman barked for order. But the verdict was done. Justice, at least this once, had slipped beyond the judge's grasp. Outside the courthouse, Alicia faced cameras and a jubilant crowd. Today isn't just about me, she said, voice strong though her hands trembled. It's about every person who walks into a courtroom and wonders if the scales of justice are already tipped. We deserve judges who honor the truth, not their prejudice. The story didn't end with the verdict. Investigative journalists soon uncovered emails showing the developer had met privately with both the prosecutor and Judge Whitman before the trial. Editorials called for accountability. Community groups circulated petitions demanding an ethics inquiry. Under growing scrutiny, Whitman announced his early retirement within months. His once unassailable career tarnished. Alicia returned to her youth center, more determined than ever. Her case became a rallying cry for judicial reform and racial equity. College students quoted her words in protests. National news outlets profiled her fight. And though the scars of those tense weeks remained, Alicia knew she had exposed something bigger than her own case. A system that bends until ordinary people demand it straighten. The memory of that final moment stayed with her, the slam of the gavel that once felt like a death knell but, in the end, sounded more like a door finally cracking open. The trial had begun as a display of power meant to silence her. Instead, it revealed the fragility of prejudice when confronted with relentless truth. Justice on trial was more than a headline. It was a testament. And as Alicia looked out over her city, she knew the fight was far from over. But she also knew that courage steadfast, unyielding could force even the coldest courtroom to reckon with its own conscience.